Graphic Audio presents Marvel's Venom, Lethal Protector by James R. Tuck. Adapted from the graphic novel by David Michelinie, Mark Bagley, and Ron Lim. Copyright Marvel. Narrated by Richard Rowan, with performances by Scott McCormick, Tim Getman, Marty Lodge, Elizabeth Demery, Harley Gordon, Michael Mowen, Joe Mallon, Rose Elizabeth Supan, Mort Shelby, Bruce Allen Rauscher, Chris Genebach, Danny Gavigan, Thomas Penny, David Jordan, Nora Ashrati, James Lewis, Peter Holdway, Colleen Delaney, Nick DePinto, Amanda Forstrom, Eric Messner, Michael John Casey, Lawrence Redmond, Chris Stinson, Bradley Smith, Christopher Walker, Jonathan Foyer, Catherine Aselford, Alyssa Wilmoth, Mary C. Davis, Matt Bassett, Nathaniel Perry, Yasmin Twazon, and Terrence Aselford. San Francisco, California. The sun had dropped below the upper edges of the tall buildings around him more than an hour ago, so the crumbling granite facade was cool enough to make his shoulder ache as he leaned against it. The shadow leached away the warmth, but it also provided him cover, a blind from which to hunt, and so he stayed still. His only movements were ragged breathing, a symptom of the illicit drugs that kept him going, and the glassy slide of his predator's eyes. Jimmy spotted her when she turned the corner, her skirt flipping and flapping around exposed legs, waving at him, drawing his attention. She was as slim and sharp as the 5-inch stiletto heels that matched her deep purple-blue top and skirt as she approached briskly from the direction of the theater district. Either her date had gone badly, or she was the only one of a gaggle of girlfriends cheap enough to risk parking in the Tenderloin instead of ponying up the cash for a valet. It didn't matter which. Taking her in with his gaze, he studied her, assessing her with all the criminal expertise he had gained over the years. He'd bet she didn't have a weapon. Not in the thin designer purse that hung low by her hip, and certainly not hidden in that dress. She probably had money, though. Pushing off from the cold building wall, he began moving toward her, determined to reach her before another hunter could pick up her scent. A twinge of pain ran up the side of Lydia's calf, a hot little electric jolt of it as she picked up her pace. Not running, that would be impossible in the knockoff Giuseppe Zanotti strapped to her feet, but moving with intent. They looked close to the $1,500 shoes they mimicked, but felt like the $25 she'd paid for them. She could hear her sister, forever in flats and sandals, the words ringing in her ears. High heels are designed by men to make it harder for women to run away. If she didn't watch her step on the uneven sidewalk, a sidewalk left unrepaired for over a decade, the shoes would toss her into the street. So she kept her eyes down, watching her step, refusing to berate herself over her choice of parking. She wouldn't. She didn't have the means that Layla hadn't lucked into the good position Maria had snagged. It was just her minimum wage job, her too expensive apartment with 4 roommates, and her $25 knockoff shoes. To distract herself, she thought about the Tenderloin and the stories her father had told her, about how it was named by a former San Francisco police chief who, when transferred to the district, claimed that with the amount of graft and bribes he had begun receiving, he could stop eating chuck steak and start eating tenderloin. She also remembered telling that story to Brad the cop on their second date, and his condescending response that the tenderloin got its name from the tender loins of the prostitutes who worked the streets after dark. That was their last date. She glanced up to see how low the sun had dropped. As she did, she felt hard hands close around her arms from behind. Her mind went blank with surprise as the hands dug deep into her flesh and propelled her sideways into the opening of an alley. One heel on her $25 knockoff snapped at the change in direction, and she stumbled, held up only by the grip of the person behind her. He flung her against the back wall of the alley, snagging the strap of her purse as he let her go. It caught in the crook of her elbow, slewing her around as she staggered, knocking her hip into a metal garbage can so full of trash it didn't even rock as she bounced off it and against the bricks of the wall. As he tore open the purse, she stood there, frozen, staring at him, holding onto the wall behind her. It took a couple of seconds to find the 2 5s and a 10 that were the only money in the purse. Fury building inside of him, he crumpled the bills in his fist and waved them at her.
This ain't nothing but chump change, lady!
She didn't speak, just stared open-mouthed through a whirl of wavy brown hair that had stuck to her face. Her eyes were wide. Jimmy liked that.
Maybe I'll have to take my pace some other way.
He was enjoying the raw fear of her expression. He lunged forward, clamping his hand over her mouth, her teeth hard against his palm. This close, he thought he could smell it, the copper tang of terror that hung between them like ozone, crackling in his nose, lighting up his adrenal glands in a tight clutch across the small of his back.
That scare ya?
He leaned close enough to make her cheek moist with his breath.
Good. I always like seeing fear in my victims' eyes.
Then he realized her eyes weren't focused on him, but were looking up and behind him.
What a coincidence.
The voice came from above. The filtered light of the falling sun cut out, dropping predator and prey both into shadow. The chill that ran up Jimmy's spine didn't come from the sudden dark, however.
So do we.
Jimmy turned to find the darkness falling on him, broken only by the stark white impression of a spider, 2 pale Rorschach blots, and teeth. So many teeth, in a raw, red mouth. The thing was human, sort of, but it was big. Really big. It dropped down beside him, all swollen muscles, coated in inky darkness. Tendrils of the blackness swirled off its limbs, looking like wind-blown ink as the newcomer hunched there. Instantly it shrugged upright, turning toward him, and he realized the white splotches were eyes. Eyes that were blank and menacing on the round head of the creature. Eyes that hovered over the mouth full of murderous teeth. Those eyes broke him, shut down every bit of feral courage the streets had instilled in him. His guts went to water, and his knees went to rubber, and even though he still clung to his victim, Jimmy wanted nothing more than to flee. Before he could turn to bolt, to run, to escape, the creature's hand shot up, black claws clamping on his throat like a collar.
You're despicable.
Jimmy felt the sharp bite of talons digging into his neck, stabbing under his jaw. Sharp points separating skin in spikes of pain he felt, even though his brain had gone into screaming, staticky panic.
You and all your kind.
The talons flexed, digging deeper for purchase. The muscles bulged in the black-covered arm, and Jimmy was in the air, feet flailing off the ground. He hung in that grip only for the briefest moment. A blink, a thought, a nanosecond came and went, and he was moving. He slammed into the brick wall. A brilliant flash of white light exploded in his head. The impact drove all the air out of his chest, but cleared his mind enough to hear the creature.
Preying on the defenseless, bringing nothing but misery.
Pinned to the wall by a clawed hand that was crushing his windpipe, Jimmy's whole world became the creature. Its blue-black skin, its blank eyes, its teeth bristling from a low-slung jaw.
Pain. Death!
Jimmy's eyes went even wider as inky tendrils rose up the creature's arm, swirling, reaching for him, until they gently caressed his face, and he was reminded of his granny's frail fingers as she used to stroke his cheek before tucking him into bed with a prayer.
You make us sick.
Still choking in the grip of those talons, his throat felt as if it was coated in ground glass.
What are you?
The hand flexed. The tendrils waved eagerly in front of him, as if encouraged by his fear, feeding on his desperation. They went blurry as his vision began to slip away in a red-rimmed haze of black static. Then they swirled together and plunged deep into his mouth, slithering up to fill his nostrils. Raw, primal panic engulfed him as he choked, and the darkness invaded each cavity, shoving its way to fill his sinuses, cracking his esophagus as it poured into his lungs, rupturing them like overfull water balloons. As Jimmy died, he never got a chance to scream. Lydia tried to be very, very still. Inky tendrils pulled away from the dead criminal's face, reeling back into the skin of the hulking creature. The taloned hand opened, letting the body fall to the filthy concrete in a boneless pile.
It's over. Now you'll do nothing but decay, running in rivulets of rot and corruption, mingling with the rest of the filth in the sewers of...
The creature stopped. Lydia didn't move. Her muscles were locked, like a rabbit frozen and trying to remain invisible. But the creature still turned toward her and smiled.
Oh, forgive us. We're being rude.
It turned until it was facing her, stepping into the weak, watery light that fell from above, causing its ebony skin to break into blue highlights.
Hi. We're Venom.
She couldn't speak, couldn't respond, even though she could tell that was what the creature, Venom, wanted from her. She could only stand, braced against the dirty brick of the alleyway wall, eyes pinned open and unblinking, as she watched Venom bend and pick up her purse. From beside the cooling corpse of her assailant, the strap snagged on something as Venom lifted it. He pulled it free and pushed it into her hands. She grabbed it out of instinct.
Here, you're safe now.
Without taking her eyes off the monster that stood before her, she scrabbled at the purse's clasp, opening it and reaching inside. Venom's hand shot out, talons extended. He patted her head, once, twice, as if she were a pet.
No, please. There's no need to thank us.
Lydia pulled her phone out of the purse. The screen had cracked at some point in the struggle. Between that and her trembling fingers, it took 3 swipes to open up the camera. Venom leaned back, watching as she lifted the phone between them. The white blots of his eyes widened, and his mouth stretched impossibly to expose each and every finger-long tooth. Spittle ran off the needle-sharp tips, slipping down his chin and running off his massive chest. It took a long moment for her to realize he was smiling. The phone flashed as she hit the button to take the picture. Venom nodded.
You get a photo of our handsome face, and we get a reward of your joy. It's enough to send me leaping happily on my way.
With that, he crouched, muscles bunching along his thighs and lower back. In a blur, he leapt 20 feet up the side of the building, digging into the bricks with talons and scrabbling upward as he disappeared from her sight. Lydia watched numbly, then peered down at the phone. With motions that came automatically, she shared the picture to her social media. As the image of Venom began zooming across the internet, Lydia looked down at the dead criminal at her feet. The last waning rays of the sun shining in from the Pacific were warm against his skin as he swung between buildings. He stretched through the open air, moving like ink through water. Reaching forward, he enjoyed the pull as a bit of him whipped out of the back of his hand, a supple cord of symbiotically generated thread in the form of a line of webbing. It hit high on the building in front of him, latching onto the stone and metal. His hand turned instinctively, rolling his wrist smoothly as the web line broke free from himself, then catching the end. Gravity pulled him down, his weight stretching the line until he gave a sharp pull, swinging himself back up in an arc, moving quickly over the streets below. He loved web slinging. Reach, shoot, thwip, snag, swing, pull, release, repeat. It felt good. He felt good.
Yes, I agree.
He said this aloud to his other. Venom was an individual made of two parts. Human and otherworldly symbiote combined to create a new creature.
Protecting innocence is satisfying indeed. Yeah. After all, we were innocent once.
He pulled left, veering smoothly around a water tower.
Before that vile Spider-Man shattered our lives.
Swinging over a wide street, made wider by streetcar rails, he let go of his web and dropped, still talking as he fell.
You, my alien friend, were rejected when you tried to bond with him, to become his living costume.
He arched, dropping fast at an angle toward the streetcar that was trundling along the rails.
A gift I accepted gratefully.
Venom sprung the moment his feet struck the metal roof of the streetcar, leaping high and shooting a new line of webbing. He ignored the startled outcry of the streetcar's passengers.
Once as Eddie Brock, I was a journalist, and a good one at that. But that was obliterated by the web-slinger's callous, self-serving publicity ploys.
Swinging high, momentum carrying him over rooftops, he went silent, listening to a voice with no sound, and scanned the street below.
True to his own twisted way, Spider-Man also helps innocence. That's why we've reconciled our hatred and come here, to the town where I was born, to start our life anew.
Giving in again to the exhilaration, he hopped from one rooftop to another, coming to a stop on the top of a dilapidated old hotel. Crouching on the edge of the parapet, he looked down. Once the building had been covered in a lovely ivory-toned plaster veneer, but most of it had cracked and fallen off, leaving wide patches of exposed brick. The fire escapes were more rust than iron, their brackets holding them loosely on the side of the building. All of the windowsills were peeling paint in long, flat strips. His symbiotically enhanced sense of smell picked up the scratchy scent of asbestos dust as it rose on warm air currents up through the ventilation duct on the roof next to him.
Yes.
He rose, standing with his toes hanging off the edge.
It will be difficult, but as long as we have each other.
Venom stepped forward, off the parapet, and into empty air. He dropped like a stone, the symbiote shifting around him, changing, retreating, transforming into street clothes. Eddie Brock's feet struck the ground gently, and he stood for a moment in the alleyway.
We will survive.
Eddie glanced around. Reassured that no one had seen him drop from above, he stepped out onto the street.
First things first. Lodging.
He turned the corner, moving toward the entrance of the flop house. Traffic passed him on the street, and a car pulled up behind him.
Simon!
Officer Art Blakey leaned forward, fingers typing on the keypad of a patrol car's computer.
Pull over while I check something.
Officer Simon Powell pulled the car over to the sidewalk in front of a flop house. Blakey had an annoying habit of making demands without explaining, but Powell was too used to it to be irritated. His eyes went to scanning the streets, passing over the homeless, ignoring the streetwalkers who gathered on the corners, but ever watchful for tourists who may have wandered there from the better parts of town. He knew what counted with the chief.
There.
Blakey pointed at the screen as a mugshot appeared, then flicked his finger toward the flophouse where a muscle-bound man was reaching for the door. The guy wore a loose, sleeveless shirt and blue denim jeans. He had sandy hair cut flat on top and long in the back.
That look like Edward Brock to you? Hair's different, but,
could be.
Powell studied the image as the guy stepped inside the flophouse.
I can't tell from here.
Says here he disappeared back east. Chief warned us he might hit town.
Blakey scrolled through the listing.
Says his father still lives in the Bay Area.
He pulled up the photos that were everywhere on social media. Photos of Venom.
Guess Eddie decided he was homesick.
Better make sure before calling it in, though.
The old man shot Eddie a side-eye as he signed the register. It bothered Eddie. The wariness, the distrust. This man didn't know him. He had no reason not to trust him. The flophouse held the sour smell of cheap wine and unwashed humanity. There was a crudely lettered sign on the peeling plaster wall.
No pets, parties, loud music, cooking, spitting, smoking, tired eyes, or young bloods.
Eddie knew he looked more together than the other occupants who had scrawled their names above his. He wasn't homeless. Well, he had been, but not now.
We've got a 5-night special.
The old man pushed his glasses up on his nose.
Save you some money.
No, just one night.
Eddie cut himself off. He wasn't wearing his other on the outside. As it was, the old man frowned. Most likely he thought Eddie would be bringing in a hooker.
I'll let you know tomorrow if I need the room again.
Eddie didn't turn, just kept signing his name. It had changed over the years, becoming more elaborate, as the symbiote added a long line that jigged and jagged and swirled back in on itself. That was its own signature, he supposed.
Keep those hands where we can see them, fella. We just want to ask you some...
Eddie turned and looked over his shoulder. 2 cops flanked the door, both with service pistols in their hands. One of them, a guy with a mustache, had his weapon pointed at Eddie. Eddie let the pen drop to the floor by his feet.
Holy jeez! It is him!
You're under arrest, Brock.
The other cop swung his gun toward Eddie as well.
For murder.
Inside Eddie, his other surged, still not breaking concealment, but rushing under his skin. It recognized the threat and wanted to burst forth, to tear these 2 intruders apart, to end the threat they posed quickly and decisively. Yet it didn't, staying inside, because that was what Eddie wanted. The rage still boiled through him.
Even here, no peace.
The cops stared. The tension in the Claptrap Hotel palpable as the potential for violence pressed like an oncoming thunderstorm. Mustache's hand trembled, his finger tightening on the trigger as he steadied it. Ducking and spinning, Eddie rolled his shoulders, the movement flinging his hands toward the 2 policemen. The symbiote rolled out, covering his fists, climbing up his arms and coating them in ebon. Webbing shot out from his wrists and zipped across the room in long, fluid arcs. It engulfed the weapons and the hands that held them, wrapping them in layers of tough, sticky membrane before a single shot could be fired.
We don't want to do this.
The symbiote spilled up his chest.
We know you're just doing your jobs, and fine jobs they are.
The inky symbiote flowed up over his face, replacing his features with a long-toothed grin and blank, splotchy eyes. The cops stood transfixed with horror at the transformation, tethered to Venom by the unbreakable strands of webbing that stretched between their hands and his.
This hurts us.
Venom rolled his arms, wrapping the webbing around taloned hands.
Almost as much as it does you.
With a minimum of effort, Venom yanked, spreading his arms wide and jerking the officers off their feet, swinging them to either side.
Oh, and before I forget...
Releasing the strands, Venom stepped back over to the counter and leaned in close to the clerk, his obscenely long tongue lolling from his mouth, spittle dripping from his lower jaw.
Cancel that room.
You bet!
Venom spun and peered at the officers, but neither moved, so he bounded toward the exit. The sidewalk was busy with people, and several bystanders turned, gasping at him as he glanced around, deciding which direction to go. A woman grabbed her husband by the arm and pointed.
Buster, what is it?
Hey,
Buster raised his phone.
I seen him on 60 Minutes. It's some crazy guy. They call him Venom. I think he's in cahoots with Spider-Man or something.
Too many people. Venom crouched, tensing.
We need to get away.
The muscles in his legs flexed like steel springs, and he leapt, rising into the air as he flung out a web to swing away. Buster snapped a picture.
Babs, honey, this is gonna pay for our vacation.
Manhattan, New York.
Nice photos, Pete.
Peter Parker rubbed the check between his fingers. A check. Only J. Jonah Jameson would still write a paper check anymore. Peter didn't know if he did it to hold on to his money for as long as he could, or if he got joy from the inconvenience depositing a check would bring to the people who dared to take his money. Knowing the ornery old cuss, it was probably both.
Thanks, Ben. I'm just glad Robbie bought them. I can use the cash.
Not that it was enough to cover the bills, but it was close. Ben Urich sat at a desk, his screen displaying the homepage of the Daily Bugle, the newspaper for which they both worked. Another part of the screen showed the United Press International website, and Ben clicked on a link.
Too bad Venom didn't resurface here.
Urich watched a clip through the bottom of his bifocals.
Pictures of him always sell.
Yeah, Venom. What about him? Where is he?
Urich enlarged the clip so that it filled the screen. It was a shaky video of a dark, muscular figure seen from behind, swinging away, on a web. Urich clicked on another link, this one for a popular social media site. There he located a series of still photos, grainy and several of them too blurry to make out. Even so, there was no mistaking the subject of the photos. Venom.
Just came up. Some tourist took the video of Venom in San Francisco after a run-in with local police, sold it to UPI. A woman who said he'd saved her from a mugger took the photos.
Ben peered at the account, and his expression darkened.
Guy was found dead in an alley. Guess Brock's someone else's problem this time.
Right.
Peter stared at the screen. Straightening, he shoved the check into his pocket.
Look, Ben, I gotta run. MJ's waiting on me.
Uh-huh. See you, Pete.
Peter walked down the hall of the 17th floor of the Daily Bugle building, thoughts and memories churning in his mind.
Venom. I was wondering where he'd gone.
Instead of leaving the building, however, he ducked down a side hall that led to the original morgue, a cavernous room lined with metal shelves that held physical copies of the newspaper, dating all the way back to its creation in 1898. He was alone. No one visited the morgue anymore, not since all of the issues had been digitized and made available via the paper's network. Old habits died hard, though, and what Peter really wanted was the privacy to think. The subtle smell of all that ancient paper always calmed him. In the years since he'd begun shooting pictures for the Bugle, he had sought it out time and again. It didn't help tonight, however. His mind was far too troubled for the gentle aromatherapy of the past to be effective.
Now that I know where he is, what do I do? After all, in a way, I'm responsible for Venom's existence.
His thoughts raced back to a time before Venom. Spider-Man and many of Earth's heroes had found themselves on an alien planet, caught up in an impossible war. His spider suit had been shredded, replaced by a black fabric that responded to his very thoughts. He thought it was a uniform, a really, really cool uniform. Looking back, he should have known it was too good to be true. Before long, though, he discovered the truth. It wasn't a smart fabric. The uniform was a living thing. A symbiote, an alien creature that sought to graft itself to him, to bond with him, forever. He would never forget the sensation of having that thing in his head. Peter remembered the ways in which he and his allies tried to remove the symbiote, the excruciating pain as the alien clung to him, furiously refusing to let go. Finally, they discovered the creature's weakness, to sound. In a touch of irony, it was the grinding tolls of cathedral bells that ultimately freed Peter from his parasitic rider. To all appearances, the alien was dead. Yet, it wasn't through with him. Eventually, Peter pieced together the events that brought Eddie Brock into the picture. Brock had been a journalist for a rival newspaper, a star on the rise whose investigative reporting had revealed the identity of a serial killer, until, as Spider-Man, Peter Parker captured the real murderer As quickly as Eddie Brock's fortunes had skyrocketed, they plummeted to earth. Brock lost everything. He was fired by the Globe, and no other news outlet would have him. His wife Anne divorced him, his life spiraled into depression, and through it all, he blamed Spider-Man for his downfall. Caught in a suicidal loop, Brock sought solace in a cathedral. Eddie's special mix of rage and despair must have been like a light in the darkness, Peter mused. In that place of worship, Brock's churning emotions drew out the eager symbiote, reveling in the hatred of a shared enemy, and together they became the creature called Venom. The one foe Peter couldn't detect with his spider sense, an enemy who knew his true identity. Sitting in the quiet of the morgue, Peter recalled the many times Venom had sought to kill him, terrorizing the ones he loved. In his own warped way, Venom maintained a code of honor, claiming to care for the innocent. Yet Peter couldn't ignore the people Brock had killed, from civilians to guards at the vault, the prison where he had been held. In the midst of their most recent encounter, Brock's ex-wife had nearly become the latest casualty, only to be saved by Spider-Man.
They say you're crazy, but you've never been so stupid.
Those words, spoken by Brock's ex, brought him up short. Faced with the undeniable truth that Spider-Man too protected the innocent, Venom agreed to a truce.
You don't come after me, and I won't come after you.
What choice had he had? Peter mused for the umpteenth time. How long would it have been before Venom killed someone important in his life? Mary Jane, Aunt May. Through the symbiote's memories, Brock knew about them all.
What could I have done differently? Different city, a different coast, yet same old body count. Brock is seriously disturbed, and a killer. Can I live with myself if I don't try to capture him? No matter what the personal cost?
Peter knew the answer.
Hello, Tiger.
Hello, MJ. Could you pack a bag for me, sweetheart? Something's come up, and I have to go to California.
California?
I'll tell you more when I get to the loft.
The Mojave Desert, California. Heat. Frying pan, blast furnace, lava, hell. She didn't care what descriptor was used. It was hot. Although blast furnace felt most apt, what with the roaring wind that beat her incessantly, wicking away every bit of moisture from her body. The tongue felt as if it had transformed to cardboard in her mouth. But she kept running. A gleam sliced the vision out of the corner of her eye, and she dove. Rolling across the creosote brush, ignoring the tough stabbing sticks of it. Bullets chewed the dirt where she had been just before her dive. A drone swooped up, curling its flight back to take another run at her. She was up on her knees, digging into the straight desert floor, fingers scrabbling. The dirt scratched the pads of her fingers, drawing blood that was soaked up immediately in the silica dust. Her fingers found what they searched for. From the dirt, she pulled out one of the spent bullets. It sat heavily in her palm, nearly 2 ounces of lead crumpled upon impact into a misshapen wad. She could hear that the drone was close enough that the wind brought to her ears the sound of the drone's targeting system, engaging as it drew near. Moving quickly, she stripped the laces from her boots, then tore the bottom of her olive drab t-shirt into a roughly square patch. Working with a flurry of speed, she tied knots in the ends of the patch, then wrapped the laces around each knot in a cinch. Pushing to her feet, she dropped the lead wad into the pocket of her makeshift sling. The drone dropped, angling toward her as she began spinning the sling around her head.
Don't move. Still. Closer.
She had one shot. Exactly one shot. If she moved a step to either side, the drone would adjust its flight path, and she would miss. Projectiles filled the air as the drone began firing. Still, she stood her ground, swinging her weapon, finding her rhythm, as the drone zipped closer. Almost. Now! She let fly the wad of lead, instantly losing track of it in the warped, heated air. The drone wobbled violently, its guns locking up as circuitry inside it began to short out from the damage done. It veered sharply, banking into the earth in a cloud of dust. Donna Diego moved toward the drone that smoldered and smoked on the desert floor. The cinder-block building barely peeked above the surface of the desert, buried deep to escape notice and the heat. The man standing outside watched her emerge from the mirage caused by the waves rising off the silica. He wore a dark suit, fully buttoned and fully trimmed, as if it were a fall day in Paris.
I don't understand how you can dress like that in these temperatures, Mr. Drake.
Donna's throat was a clenched fist of dehydration. He studied her coolly, taking in her ropey muscles carved from intense training, the determination so hard set in her wind-burned face, and the pair of machine guns ripped from his drone that filled her hands.
It just takes practice, Ms. Diego.
She lifted the weapons.
Do you want these back? I used them to take out the rest of those killbirds you had on my trail.
He pointed to the left of the bunker.
No, you may put them over there in the desert.
Donna took a few steps. Off to her left, 4 more figures appeared on the horizon, moving toward them, and she immediately wanted to retrieve the discarded firearms.
We have incoming!
Carlton Drake stepped up beside her.
That will be Karl Mach, Leslie Jesnaria, Ramon Hernandez, and Trevor Cole. They are the only ones besides you who successfully completed the course.
The shapes became more defined, looking more like humans, even through the wavy, blurred atmosphere.
What happened to the ones who failed?
That's none of your business. In failing, they are of no consequence. For this project, we only seek the best of the best.
They had started the trial that morning with 60 people.
5 of us will be enough?
5 of you can fix the world, Ms. Diego.
San Francisco, California. Last night had been spent on the roof of a bakery. He rarely needed much sleep, and today he awoke in the early dawn hours to the scent of bread and pastries drifting around him. His shoulder ached a bit from lying propped on a parapet, but the pain dissipated when the California sun warmed him through the leather jacket, which wasn't really a jacket at all. His other, the symbiote, transformed itself into any type of clothing Brock might think of. And in the cool night, a slick motorcycle jacket and jeans had sprung to mind. He didn't order the symbiote to form into any particular outfit. It just plucked the desire from his subconscious. That connection had hummed inside his brain from the moment they had bonded, a low-level empathic interface that bypassed logic. Such intimate communication enabled them to function as a single entity when they were Venom. Even so, Eddie always found himself talking to the symbiote, out loud.
I have to admit,
He strolled along a path in Del Rio Park.
I feel a little lost. You were born on another planet. You have an excuse for being alone. But I grew up in San Francisco, and now I can't even rent a room here without being arrested. The
symbiote tickled an image from his subconscious, bringing it up for Eddie to see in his mind's eye.
Contact my father. Never. The last thing I'll do is ask that ice-blooded monster for help.
The image faded as the symbiote relented. In its absence, Eddie stopped, considering.
No, it'll be a cold day in hell before I call him. But what then?
Trees loomed overhead, varying between elms, palms, and the shorter ficus. Eddie's contemplation deepened.
Without a career, without Spider-Man to ravage, without some ambition.
As the consequences of his situation began to fall on him, he leaned against one of the trees. Gulls wheeled overhead as he stared at a group of men and women, young and old, wearing tattered, dirty clothing, and gathered around a circle of overloaded shopping carts.
We could end up like those poor homeless people over there, trundling our sad possessions in grocery carts from shelter to shelter.
Half a dozen or more figures approached the group. They were big men in cheap suits, not even off the rack, but off the back of a truck, ill-fitted and made of cheap polyester blends. They bunched at beefy joints and pulled in shiny folds across broad shoulders. They strode toward the homeless, projecting a bubble of potential violence. Eddie could pick out a thug 100 yards away. These thugs were considerably closer. Vietnam Tom shifted from leaning on his cart. He wasn't old enough to have served in Vietnam, no. He'd taken his shrapnel in Kuwait and Operation Desert Storm. But Kuwait Tom hadn't caught on when he'd finally had enough of the system that refused to treat him like a human, and he dropped down to the streets. Here, last names replaced first names, and otherwise people picked up handles, nicknames, monikers, and sobriquets. So he'd been Vietnam Tom for as long as he could remember. Tom had lost so much of his former self, but he hadn't lost it all. His situational awareness, grafted into his DNA in boot camp, was still intact, and at the moment it was sounding the alarm. A group of men in suits were moving toward his group. The group had gathered there to share the news and information of the day, gleaned on the street. Engrossed as they were in conversation, the rest didn't see the approaching threat. When the newcomers left the walking path and began moving over the grass in their direction, Tom stood as straight as he could and locked his hands on the front of his cart.
Here comes trouble.
It had to be Treese. Young Timothy grabbed Elizabeth's hand. Nathaniel, always looking for trouble, dropped into a defensive crouch. A few folks pushed their carts into the bushes and all conversation stopped. All except for Space, who was flying to Jupiter in his broken brain.
Gamma radiation and beta rays. That's how they get ya.
Tom lifted his chin and tensed, using his cart to brace himself. He would be hit first. His legs hadn't worked right since shrapnel had taken him out of the action at Medina Ridge. Running wasn't in his toolkit anymore, so he braced himself. He still wasn't ready when the violence took him. The first blow hit him between the shoulder blades, knocking him forward into the cart. He didn't let go, even though he couldn't see past the white flare of pain across his eyes. It was his cart. His. He rescued it from a grocery store and he had kept it, pushing it around the city of San Francisco for almost a decade now. It was his. Vietnam Tom wouldn't let it go unless these men killed him. His eyes started to clear as he tried to drag his feet back under him to stand. The other thugs rushed past him, going after his friends. But the one who'd hit him stayed back, ready to dole out more punishment. Tom had a broken wine bottle in the cart, kept there for protection. It was jagged and wicked sharp, wedged between a bundle of plastic from an abandoned garage and a pair of boots that didn't fit him, snagged from a construction site. He'd never pull out the bottle, though, unless he was going for the kill. It was daylight. There were people nearby enjoying the park. These guys wouldn't use lethal force. He might have to take a beating, but he wasn't going to be killed. Not here, not in the sun. No, the bottle wasn't an option. Then, a blow that felt like it came from a hammer hit the back of his skull, and for a second, he was back in the desert, being blasted by the grenade that sent him home to a hospital bed. There was so much force behind it, his feet lost touch with the ground, and he fell, his car tipping, all his possessions spilling across the concrete. Through the throbbing pain that racked his body, as he lay among the shards of his only defense, he realized he might have been wrong in his assessment of the situation. He began praying he wouldn't be killed there in the sun.
We warned you to find somewhere else to set up housekeeping.
The man leaned down.
Now we're gonna give you a place to stay. The hospital. I hear they serve soft food there.
He lifted Vietnam Tom up by the lapel of his coat, drawing a fist back to deliver on his words.
You won't even miss your teeth.
Tom closed his eyes, waiting for the blow. His attacker jerked him up and then dropped him, sending him falling to the sidewalk. Tom lay there, confused, and opened his eyes to find a new person on the scene. The guy held the thug by his shoulder. He was big, with muscles that said weightlifter. His leather jacket seemed to drink up the sunshine, with no gleam of polish on it anywhere.
Leave them alone.
The thug jerked back a step, pulling free.
Oh, man, did you ever make a mistake?
Instantly, his hand was under his jacket and back out again, holding a blocky, semi-automatic pistol. The new guy just stood there. He didn't move, other than to clench his fist. Was his jacket leaking?
No.
Tendrils of something black and oily ran from the sleeve of the jacket down onto his clenched fist.
But you did.
He lashed out to grab the gun and the thug's gun hand. Before Tom's eyes, the whole arm was coated in black, fingers becoming talons, the darkness broken only by a patch of white on the back of the hand. That hand flexed. Tom crawled away as more inky darkness ran up from the collar of the jacket and over the man's hair to consume his entire head. Spider-Man swung wide, carried over the wall separating the city park from the street. Tall objects were farther apart in San Francisco, so he adjusted his technique to make up the difference. It was new but familiar, and quickly became second nature. As he swung in among the trees, he did so on autopilot, allowing his mind to roll over his problem of finding Venom. It had been hours since his plane had arrived. Using his Daily Bugle press credentials, he'd learned that Brock was checking into a hotel when he was spotted. That was in the area called the Tenderloin, but Peter's quarry was long gone. Homeless, he'd realized. Without a hotel room, Eddie might still be on the street. His best bet for blending in would be a shelter, or among the street people. A quick check of the shelters revealed that Brock's photo had already been distributed, so that option was out. However, the worker at the last one suggested that Peter check out the local parks. With year-round mild weather, encampments sprang up in some of the public spaces. The first couple yielded nothing, so here he was at Del Rio Park, not far from the Mission District. Pulling hard on his web, the web-slinger swung up and over some trees and past a fountain. Covered head to toe with his red and blue suit, he didn't feel the misty spray of the water as he sailed through it. Not far away, he saw children enjoying themselves in a state-of-the-art playground. Arcing through the air, he scanned the ground, looking for any sign of Eddie Brock. There was nothing so far. Spider-Man twisted around and changed course.
Gunshots!
He swung in the direction of the shots. Even if they didn't have anything to do with Venom, he thought he'd better see if he could help. A blonde thug built like a linebacker threw himself at his opponent, thickly muscled arms latching around his waist as Venom knocked another thug sprawling and held a third in the air. His face wrapped in ribbons of symbiote. The man clawed at the tendrils, but to no avail.
Ooh, a bear hug.
The linebacker's grip had no effect, and he bounced around like a rag doll.
Perhaps when we're through with this cockroach, we'll hug you back till you burst.
Abruptly, Venom was knocked off balance. Venom's opponents scattered like marbles thrown by an angry child. Hurtling like a freight train, Spider-Man had struck the ebon figure between the shoulder blades, arriving feet first. Venom staggered forward, but kept his feet. Spider-Man bounced away from the impact.
Yesterday was cops, and now it's these guys. What are they? FBI? Secret Service?
Landing nimbly on his feet and dropping into a crouch, he continued the motion and lashed out like a jackhammer.
Should have known you'd go back to your old ways.
He launched a series of blows, his knuckles knocking out obscenely long teeth that scattered through the air and tumbled to the ground.
All that talk about both of us protecting the innocent. There was nothing but bull.
The symbiote shook under the assault, rippling over its host in waves of darkness, repairing damage as soon as it occurred.
You won't get another chance, Venom. This ends now!
A black hand flashed up, catching Spider-Man's punch and stopping it cold. Bracing himself, holding the fist hostage in one hand, Venom reached out, tangling in Spider-Man's suit and yanking him close. close enough for him to watch as the teeth that had been knocked out regrew in a blink. It was a surreal sight.
You shouldn't be here. We had an arrangement. We'll discuss your betrayal later.
Venom's limbs vibrated, and it looked as if he was trying to control his anger.
For the moment, there's something you need to know. Those gentlemen you assume to be peace officers
Venom jerked his head to indicate the thugs.
aren't.
Spider-Man suddenly felt a familiar hot tingling, his spider sense jangling a warning.
That shouldn't be possible. Venom doesn't...
Get him!
Venom released his grip and jumped off to the side. Toward a nearby group of the homeless. Spider-Man leapt toward the men who were firing in his direction, rising over their line of fire. Behind him, the bullets chewed the ground he had occupied.
This is nuts. The guys in the suits are trying to kill me, but Venom isn't?
Then he was among the heavily armed thugs, delivering a storm of punches and kicks, knocking henchmen to the ground and smashing the weapons from their hands. He was a red and blue-clad hurricane, and they were cheap umbrellas on a beach. Ducking under a punch, Spider-Man dodged as it sailed over his head, then swung his fist up to catch an assailant in the ribs. The man came up off his feet and did a barrel roll in midair, knocking down some of the other men with him. Bracing himself, the web spinner sent his foot shooting out, connecting solidly with a blonde thug big enough to be a football player. His tensile grip latched him to the man, foot to chest. Spider-Man twisted his hips, and the man went down hard, his chin bouncing off the concrete path.
I got a few zillion questions to ask. After I make sure the Uzi brothers don't wipe out a few zillion innocent bystanders.
Spider-Man spun, firing webbing that splattered over a thug's gun, and then thwapped it up into the man's face. 2 more kicks sent 2 more henchmen to the ground. He spun to find one last thug on his feet, pointing an actual Uzi at him. 2 effortless hops, and Spider-Man dealt out a vicious roundhouse swing.
There, last one.
Surveying the scene to make sure there were no more immediate threats, he whipped out enough webbing to cover the firearms lying on the ground, securing them until the police could arrive. He scanned the area.
I come 3,000 miles looking for a needle in a haystack, actually find the sucker, then end up right back where I started.
The homeless were gone. Venom was gone. All that remained were the downed thugs and a small crowd of bystanders approaching cautiously.
Where in blazes is Venom now?
Portland, Oregon. The news channel kept cutting away from the anchor. A pretty woman, apparently kept that way with surgical precision. The scenes of people doing terrible things to each other soothed him after a lifetime of waging war. 4 years into retirement, after 20-plus years in the military, and General Orwell Taylor still didn't feel like a civilian. Not without his son.
Breaking news. This just in from San Francisco.
Taylor looked up to see the pretty anchor's face as new images played behind her on the 50-inch screen, leaving him stunned. Spider-Man, in all his ridiculous glory, fighting the monstrous creature known as Venom.
At last, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord.
He dialed a number only known to a handful of people. He picked up a picture of a smiling, good-looking young man in uniform, the American flag displayed behind him. It could have been the general himself in his younger years. He spoke to the photo of his son, as he did too often.
Soon, Hugh, very soon indeed, righteous revenge will be ours as well. Squad Leader Elkins, assemble your men. Target sighted.
Beneath Del Rio Park, San Francisco, California. The air was cool and dry as they walked through it. It had the clean, bright scent of turned earth that tickled the lungs. which made sense considering the tunnel they tromped through had been carved from the earth. It surrounded them on all sides, from the hard-packed floor they walked on, to the walls that arced 20 feet up and over their heads. There wasn't much light to be had, just enough to make out facial features, but it didn't bother him, and didn't seem to bother anyone in the group either. There were 5 of them, the homeless people from the park.
I never would have suspected that sewer grate to lead anywhere but, well, a sewer.
Eddie peered through the semi-darkness at the only woman in the group.
This is part of our sanctuary, Mr. Brock.
She was still holding the hand of the boy Eddie presumed was her son. There was a family resemblance. Same brow, same nose, same chin.
And the least we can do is share it with someone who so selflessly came to the aid of strangers.
Are you crazy or just plain stupid?
Behind them, a scrawny young man wearing a long, dirty scarf that flapped around him like a pennant in the wind, jumped and threw up his arms.
He's Venom, a psycho with a space monster for clothes. How can you even think of sharing our...
Vietnam Tom stepped forward.
That's enough, Nathaniel. Whether or not he stays isn't up to you, or Elizabeth, or me for that matter. The council will decide, and we'll all abide by their ruling.
Nathaniel glared for a long moment before nodding. Brock could tell he wasn't convinced, but the kid didn't seem like a threat. Not really.
Look, I'm glad I could help, and really glad none of you were killed. But who were those guys?
The thugs hired by Roland Treese. He's a corporate bigwig who's been trying to drive us out of this area for months. Why is anyone's guess. But the guy seems determined.
Shh!
Elizabeth pulled the boy closer to her.
That sound!
As the sound grew stronger, Brock felt certain it was mechanical in nature. Then he could hear it as well. Nothing clanged hollowly like that, except steel against steel, like a clapper in a bell. The thought made his skin crawl.
Something's in the tunnel ahead. Ah!
Then, abruptly, light speared through the tunnel. A white-hot spotlight that hovered several feet in the air. Then another, and another.
Oh, Lord! Diggers!
What the?
Brock's eyes adjusted to reveal 2 hulking machines that possessed vaguely humanoid form. With wide, stamping feet designed for stability, they looked like hunched giants, their arms almost dragging along the ground, while their backs nearly brushed the tunnel's 20-foot-high ceiling. Their arms were bristling with items that looked like tools. Wrapped in what appeared to be heavy steel plating, they looked more like bulldozers than robots.
Treese machines with more hirelings inside!
Elizabeth pointed to the upper parts of their torsos. Both diggers had plexiglass-covered cockpits that held clearly visible pilots, men driving the machines.
He sends them into the tunnels to look for us, but they've never found us before.
Get behind me. Walk back the way we came. Maybe if we don't seem to be a threat, they won't...
The impact knocked him off his feet as the closest digger slammed a claw into his chest. It closed tight as a vice around his chest, lifting him into the air, trying to crush him into so much meat.
Finally got one of you scruffy leeches.
Hanging in the mech's grip, Brock tried to catch his breath. Had he been a stock from the factory human, his bones would have snapped like twigs from the digger's strike. Just as likely he would have been dead, and Eddie was once again grateful for his other, glad they had found each other all those months ago.
Out.
Yes, Brock agreed. He knew the men in the mechanical suits sought to hurt the innocent. They didn't know he was special, though. How could they? They had attacked him thinking he was just like everyone else. Fragile, breakable, human.
Out!
The symbiote rattled in his brain as the digger raised its other arm, revealing an assortment of tools that revolved until one device jutted forward and locked into place. The tip of it gleamed, a twisted pyramid of bladed edges that began to spin.
Still alive, eh? Well, we can fix that. My diamond drills are gonna gut you like a trout.
The arm swung forward, the whirling diamond blades gleaming wickedly in the low light. Brock just relaxed. Crisscrossing shadows and light lent chaos to the scene as the symbiote crawled out of his pores and covered him in inky blackness. His clothes changed, merging with the ooze. Already impressive muscles swelled, growing, becoming larger and denser. The added bulk and biomass translated into strength and power that coursed through his body. The teeth sprouting along his jawline tickled as they rolled into place like a row of spikes. Spikes the length of fingers and sharp enough to shred flesh. His tongue lengthened, rolling out like a sticky pink whiplash. Spittle sloshed off it as it waved around his face. As the other covered Eddie's head, the transformation was complete.
Trout, actually. We prefer flounder.
Venom lashed out at the diamond drill. Where he struck the drill, it shattered, disabling the other tools as well. Edges of the drill bit snapped off, flying away to bounce off the rocky walls of the tunnel. Metal tangled around itself, bending and twisting into knots of destruction. The mech spun as if the man inside could feel the injury.
Holy cripes. What the hell is that?
Venom latched his hands under the prongs of the claw and flexed, applying all of his strength against the hydraulics. One of the hydraulic pistons burst from the incredible pressure of his symbiote-enhanced strength. Cold fluid shot out across his torso in a macabre imitation of blood. A prong of the claw fell away, still connected, but hanging limply from its joint. As Venom pulled himself up, intent upon yanking the pilot from his cockpit, white-hot agony splashed across his back, causing the symbiote to part, leaving Brock's skin exposed to a line of liquid fire. All too human flesh blistered. The intense pain of the wound made it impossible to think, and he didn't have the wherewithal to hold on to the broken claw. As he tumbled from the broken grip of the mech, he heard the other digger behind him.
I don't know why, but this laser cutter's really making the stuff on his back squirm.
Venom had hit the ground in a crouch. The burn across his back hurt like hell. Fire was among his few weaknesses, and the intense heat of the laser cutter was apparently close enough to do serious damage. Once he was out of the cutter's beam, however, the symbiote spilled over the strip of smoking flesh, soothing the pain and repairing the damage.
Barbecue? I thought we were having fish.
Venom shook his head, drool slinging out of his fang-filled mouth.
Never mind. Snack time's over.
He leapt, smashing into the digger that had burned him.
Let's play.
The mech suit teetered under the force of the strike, then toppled completely as he rode it to the ground. Crouched on the mechanical form, Venom found himself above the cockpit, peering through the window. The driver inside gaped at him, eyes wide, mouth hanging open.
Tag, you're it.
Venom drove his fist into the plastic, and the pain cracked under the blow. Through white, Rorschach eyes, Venom stared down at the man in the mech. Saliva dripped off his fangs and dribbled down the clear surface. The man had his hands up as if to hold Venom back.
What? Tired already?
Venom leaned in closer to the window, pressing one long, taloned hand against the surface.
Then maybe we can help you take a nice...
Ebony tendrils snaked out from his fingers.
Long...
The tendrils writhed, finding their way into the cracks.
Lap.
The next pilot pushed himself farther back, pressing down into the seat, trying to force himself through the seat, just to get away from the hideously thin, worm-like ribbons squirming through the busted windshield and into the cockpit.
Black stuff! Oozing into the cracks! Hold it! Help me!
The first mech lumbered closer, coming up behind the combatants.
Maybe this sound shovel can...
Ultrasonic waves, designed to loosen soil and make the digger's job easier, blasted out, striking Venom and engulfing his body in pulsing sonic energy. The effect was instantaneous. Both man and symbiote writhed in sheer agony. Venom arched back so far that it looked as if he had no spine. Streams of symbiotes swirled around him like obscene party streamers. Hurtling backward, he struck the floor of the tunnel with an impact that would have killed a normal human being.
Whoa!
Harlan increased the tempo as he kept the assault focused on his target.
Sonic beam's sure doing something. Looks like he's in agony. Then hold him down.
The second digger lumbered to its feet. Its pilot maneuvered the claw arm, raising it straight into the air.
I'll mash this wisecracking scumball into pulp.
Driven by hydraulics, the heavy arm fell and smashed into Venom with so much force that chunks of concrete and stone erupted from the floor beneath him. The mech raised its arm to deliver another crushing blow. Without warning, the cracks in the tunnel floor spread, crawling underneath the mechanical suit's feet, widening as they did. As the hydraulic arm thrust downward again, the floor disappeared. Then, the light disappeared. Only vaguely aware of his surroundings, Venom found himself engulfed in a freefall of blackness.